Welcome to a little bit of Stockport's past. Before the advent of the car parks in Stockport's town centre, many people may not know what was there before. On these grounds stood row upon row of terraced houses that were built around the 1800s in order to accommodate the influx of workers at Stockport's cotton and hatting industry, which was then in its heyday. As quaint as they look in many of the photos you see of the old terraced houses, they tell only a silent story of how the residents of these streets lived. Life was hard for all and money was tight. The old Stockport I knew holds many childhood memories for me as the place I was born in and spent the first few years of my life. We afforded no such luxuries back then that we take so much for granted today. None of the houses had inside bathrooms, central heating or running hot water. The people that lived on these streets surrounding the town from Brinksway to Portwood and from Heaton Norris to Hillgate were the life and blood that kept the heart of Stockport beating. Most of the women folk worked in the cotton mills of Stockport, just as my mother did. She was a doffer at the Welkin Mill in Portwood. By 1769, nearly 2,000 people were employed in the town's silk trade, but by 1772, the silk industry was in depression, and Stockport turned to cotton. The cotton industry peaked in 1912, when it produced 8 billion yards of cloth. The Welkin Mill, Lower Bredbury, was one of 104 mills bought by the Lancashire Cotton Corporation, and one of the few mills that survived through to the 1950s. Bath time was a long and arduous task, but first you had to bring the bath in from outside. You'd find it hung on a nail outside the back door. The bath would be placed in front of the fire and the hot water would be boiled in kettles on the open fire, as well as in galvanised buckets on the gas stove. Fill the bath with hot water and Bob's your uncle, and if Bob needed a bath as well, he can always get in it after you. Just top it up with hot water for him. The same bath with water was commonly used for more than one person. When bath time was over, the water had to be ladled out with a bucket and poured down the sink, and the bath was hung on the nail on the back door until the next time. Heating was by way of an open coal fire. All the houses had one of these. They were the focal point of the family life in the home. As well as for heating, they were used to boil kettles of water for making pots of tea, or for washing up, and hot water to fill the bath. And in many cases it could be used for cooking and baking on the side oven. On the cold winter's night we would sit by the fire listening to the radio, staring into the fire grate, mesmerised by the bright yellow flames, licking around the cold lumps of coal and the hot glowing embers. In the coziness of the heat we would sit and play I Spy, or Hangman, or Film Stars. Then as it neared bedtime, Mother would get out the toasting fork, making tea and toast all round for supper. If you've never had a piece of toast made on one of these spread with dripping, then you don't know what you've been missing. As the night drew to a close for us kids, we would then take a shelf each out of the hot oven, wrap them in a towel and take them to bed. They would use them as bed warmers, lovely for keeping our feet warm. TV was in its infancy and far too expensive for most people, and there was no electricity laid onto many of those houses, including ours, so our only form of entertainment was a wireless radio that was powered by a rechargeable wet cell battery accumulator.
We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
If you needed to use the toilet, then it was a case of putting on your wellies and coat to take a walk along the yard to the shared outside lobby, and then after getting there found someone had beaten you to it, and that was as long as you didn't mind sharing a bit of your space with the other sitting tenants of the building. Not many ventured out into the dead of night to use the outside lobby, so during the night, if you needed to go, most people used the old faithful guzunda. This was a chamber pot that goes under the bed, or a bucket. Traditionally Monday was the wash day, but whatever day you chose, it was a task that few women looked forward to. Until recently, and well within the lifetime of most British people, wash day was a real chore, a chore that has largely disappeared from Britain altogether. However, until a few years ago, wash day entailed a few full days' hard work. Today we just pop the clothes in the washer and forget all about them until it's done, but it was not always that easy. All the equipment you had to wash your clothes in the 1950s were a mangle, a posser, a dolly peg, And a zinc dolly tub, what more could you ask for? Back in the 1950s, this was how the weekly wash was done. A posser or dolly peg to agitate the clothes in the zinc tub. The clothes would be wrung out through the mangle, and the excess soapy water would go back in the tub. Nothing was wasted. When it came to larger, heavier items like bedding, most of the women would load it up on the pram and take it to the public wash house. The pram was often the only means of transportation that folk had available back then. The pram was used to transport the washing back and forth. In fact, the pram was served many other useful purposes too, including moving bags of coal. In fact, anything heavy that the housewife needed to move, the pram would be put into service. The wash house was often preferred for doing the washing than in your own home, especially if you had a large family. This was one chore that would take up the whole day. In the wash house, everything was on hand. You could do the weekly wash and dry it, ready for immediate use. Plus, it was also a social gathering, where the women would have a good old natter and help each other with their washing. If you think living this way was hard work, then you would be right. But just imagine what it must have been like in the early part of the 1940s, when there was also a war going on. During the war, to what was already hard living conditions, they had to endure air raids and working all around all the shortages that had been war produced. Stockport was bombed in 1940-41, but escaped serious damage. Like all towns in the early 19th century, Stockport was dirty, overcrowded and unsanitary. There were epidemics of cholera in Stockport in 1832 and 1849. Sewers in Stockport were dug and put into place during the 1850s and 60s. Conditions did then start to improve. In 1880 there were horse-drawn trams going from Stockport to Manchester. It wasn't until 1902 when they started to use electricity. Let's take a look at some of the old houses that used to stand on these streets. This is one of my favourites, taken from the bottom of Bridgefield Street around the late 1940s and behind what is now Titterton's and the Pound bakery shop. You can see the old gas lamps in the foreground and the viaduct in the distance. And 70 years later, this photo is taken from the very same place and is how it looks today. This one is taken from the top of Bridgefield Street. You can see St Mary's Church in the background, and this is what it looked like in 1958. This one taken in 1963 and shows how Great Edgerton Street came up to the A6. When the motorway was built, Great Edgerton Street went under the A6, and this is how it looks today from the same place. Again, Edgerton Street looking towards the A6. This was taken just as the slum clearance got underway in 1963, and how it looks today. Many will still remember this, taken in Port Street looking towards Princess Street. Debenhams now stands in its place. Finally, this one taken from the bottom of Stewart Street at the bottom of the Red Wreck Brow in 1963, and the same place today from the footbridge over the motorway.